Policy Exchange this afternoon. As Senior Fellow here at Policy Exchange in Economics and Social Policy, it's my absolute pleasure to welcome you here today for today's debate with Andy Haldane in conversation with the Right Honourable Nadhim Zahawi, Chancellor of the Exchequer. So Nadhim, the last time we met, I think, was at a dinner for former Education Secretaries, and you were hosting as the current Education Secretary. I saw at that dinner your extreme passion for the subject, and I know now that as Chancellor of the Exchequer, at the most critical time in recent British or indeed global economic history, you will be demonstrating exactly the same passion, working through the issues on the cost of living crisis, both here and of course in your recent trip to the US, and you have come a long way to join us for today's event, so thank you very much for flying in to join us here today. And you have formidable experience as well, not just with your previous ministerial positions in energy, business and health. You're also one of the very few government ministers to have real business experience, having in the year 2000 founded YouGov, the incredibly successful market research and online polling company. So welcome here today, Nadhim. Andy, in 2014, you were described by Time magazine, I think, as one of the most 100 influential people in the world. I think since that time, your influence has arguably even increased. With what now seems an incredibly prescient view expressed this time last year about bubbling inflationary pressures in the economic system, you were the only one of the Monetary Policy Committee to argue that interest rates should be raised. I think at that time you were predicting that inflation might spiral out of control to as high as 4%. So congratulations on your prescience, if nothing else. But since leaving the bank in 2021, as chief economist, you've become CEO of the Royal Society of Arts. You've also co-authored the government's white paper on levelling up and are chair of the government's levelling up commission too. And that means that your influence on macroeconomic policy has continued at the highest level. So it's really, really good to have both of you here today. Now we are fairly tight for time, so I'm going to ask Andy to kick off the in-conversation bit of this debate with the Chancellor of the Exchequer. I'm then going to turn to the audience for some questions at the end, and I'll be looking to the online screen for people who have raised their virtual hands as well as to the audience. But over to you, Andy.
Thank you, Ruth. Afternoon, everyone. A huge pleasure to be sharing this platform with Ruth and Nadhim, both of whom, at various stages of my career, I've had the privilege of working alongside closely, and it was a real education for me, so a real privilege and pleasure today to continue the conversation about the economy with Nadhim and with you all. I'm just thinking, Nadhim, whether I could, in my what has been quite a long career looking at the economy now, I could think of a more challenging macro moment than now. I'm not sure that I can actually. I mean, I had a ringside seat during the ERM crisis, during the global financial crisis, during the COVID crisis. They all felt pretty grim. But at least then inflation wasn't getting away from us. And at least then interest rates could be cut to cushion the blow. And neither of those ingredients are in place now. And that gives me cause for pause about where we are. I don't know what your sense is, before we turn to policy, about the kind of diagnosis of how you're seeing the economy.
There is no doubt that these are probably the most challenging times that a government has faced. Why? Because historically, as you've just quite rightly sort of taken us through those shocks in the past, there's been a gap between each shock for the economy to recover, for us to be in a place where we can obviously deal with the next shock. This time round, there's been very little gap between the pandemic, the virus, and of course war on our continent. But there are some things that I think we need to do that will, I hope, help us weather this storm, the most important thing I can do is exercise fiscal discipline. So one of the first things that was in my in-tray, first weekend of being Chancellor, was to make sure I got collective agreement of the Cabinet, of the Secretaries of State on public sector pay. And of course, we accepted the recommendation of the public sector pay review bodies. Public sector pay is rising. I think it's the biggest increase in 20 years, but it's worth just reminding ourselves that because inflation is running ahead of that, I understand that those teachers, those nurses, and others will see their income shrink, of course, because of inflation, which is why it's so important that we maintain that discipline. And I talk about this very much in I frame this as being, we have a dictator who has invaded a neighbouring country that is free and democratic on our continent. Very few people anticipated war on our continent. We have now war on our continent. Wars used to happen in far-flung places, and we'd send aid and other things. Now it's with us. Putin has worked out that he can use energy as a tool to hit back at us for the help we're putting into Ukraine. I think it's incumbent on us to remain resolute, to remain united, in the way we did with the response to the pandemic. We came together and delivered the largest mobilization in peacetime on the vaccine deployment. And we need to do the same thing now. I've just come off a call of the G7. We have just agreed the oil price cap. That is a significant agreement that we have just delivered. It will mean two things. One, that Putin cannot profiteer from excessively high oil prices. And two, we can make sure that we protect ourselves against oil price shocks in 2023 and beyond. And so there are things we can do collectively by, for example, on the gas market, by, I think, coordinating much more closely with our European neighbours to reassure the markets, because the markets started behaving in an irrational way, partly driven by countries having to replenish their gas storage for the winter. So lots of challenges, but there is some resilience as well in the economy. You and I have discussed this. Unemployment is at a record low in our country. Of course, I do worry about the businesses that will need help with the energy costs, because the long-term scarring effect of those businesses that are perfectly viable are left to go under will obviously be huge damage to the economy, and of course we may see a tick in unemployment in the wrong direction. The housing market, we've seen equity, I think, post-pandemic rise by about $1 trillion in housing. 75% of people have got fixed mortgages, but of course we can't be complacent. We have to keep an eye on that, because those fixed mortgages will be 2 to 3 years, maybe a bit longer. And the banks are pretty well capitalised. So there is a resilience in the economy. I also think the bank, and I wanted to deliver the Mansion House speech deliberately to demonstrate that our institutions are strong. No matter what the political drama is in our country, our institutions work. I promised that we'd deliver the Financial Services and Markets Bill the next day, which we did. And of course wanted to send the message that the Governor and I are coordinating very closely, that the bank has the tools available to it to be able to deal with inflation in terms of monetary policy.
So, on this, let's go to the cost of living crisis.
Yeah.
Because when you look at the diagnosis of that, it is partly a story of energy, it's partly a story of Russia-Ukraine, but it's not all about that. What we now see is the price of almost everything going up. Not just energy and food, but pretty much every good and service. And of course, the price of labour, wages as well. And we find fractures, fault lines in the supply chain, if you like, for many things, including for people. We have a chronic shortage of staff and skills in this country. So what if we speak a bit about, there's tidying over the short run to cushion the blow to businesses and consumers, particularly those most exposed. But some of those problems are of longer standing and will require structural solutions rather than short-term fiscal sticking plasters, if you like, I think, to address them.
No, I think you're right. I mean, if you look at what we're seeing on the labour market, and again, I go back to whether it's the private sector or the public sector, we all need to come together and weather this storm that Putin is deliberately using. Because the more we divide, the more we chase inflation in terms of settlements on pay, the longer we'll embed inflation and actually hurt the people that we most need to help, the most vulnerable families. And so that we just need to be cognizant of that fact and effectively work through it together. But you're right on if you look at supply side interventions, skills has been always something where successive governments have introduced some interesting ideas, but we haven't yet scaled any of those. So T levels, I think, is if you take that as a intervention, it's a fusion between an apprenticeship and an A level. You can do a T level and go and work in care or in construction or in digital, very soon in manufacturing. But even in 2024, we'll only have about 100,000 T levelers. Now, that's a good thing because scale is hard in the public or private sector. But I do think we need to focus on skills. We got a good settlement from the Treasury under Rishi, the 3.8 billion into skills. But scale is hard. And so some of these things are much longer term. By the way, in terms of reassuring the markets of what we're going to need to do, whether it's the help that we'll need to provide in the short term, you also need to have a medium to long term energy strategy.
Yeah.
So one of the discussions I've been having in the US is to take them through our strategy and our thinking on things like nuclear. And obviously we've putting a lot of effort into large nuclear, but then the SMRs, so these are the small modular reactors, and then the AMRs, I think we have an opportunity. I don't think you can deliver net zero by 2050 and be prosperous and dynamic and have a high wage, high skilled economy without nuclear, without doubling down on offshore wind, without tidal power. I saw a brilliant company in Scotland that has commercialized tidal power. And so we need to be able to reassure the markets that we have a medium and long-term strategy to wean ourselves of expensive imported hydrocarbons. And that's very much part of the story, I think, for the incoming Prime Minister.
Well, I think it's not just financial markets that need that reassuring message too. I mean, the thing about the conflation of events in the macroeconomy right now is that it will be in almost no one's lived experience, right? So it's been a real shock to the system and therefore a cause of anxiety to people. And in terms of meeting that anxiety head on, part of it is the short-term support. But I think an equally important part is having a sense of what might lie beyond.
Exactly right.
It's a plan for growth over the medium term that encourages people today to invest in themselves, in their business, in their community, in their place, in that infrastructure. The fiscal and the structural strike me as yin and yang here. We need both to tell a story about the short-term smoothing, the longer-term growth.
You're absolutely right. And the stuff that you and I worked on, so if you look at what has worked for us in our economy, the life sciences sector deals, you look at what we've been able to do in life science investment in the UK, that's really been a long-term modern industrial strategy that has delivered that. And I think we learn those lessons and see where you can actually apply the same principles again, which is sector and place. Let's look, take the chemical sector. The chemical sector, we're blessed, we have probably half a dozen, the INEOSs, Synthomas and others. And if you map those against what the media describes as the red wall sees, they map pretty well. So could we look at a sector deal for the chemical sector to grow and invest in the UK? I was in Northern Ireland as my first visit as Chancellor. I've been to Wales and Scotland as well. But in Northern Ireland, what Queen's University's done on cyber, they put up a slide saying they are now the number one investment for US cyber companies in Northern Ireland. We need to double down on that and see how we can create the ecosystem that Boston has, for example, in life sciences, where the venture capitalists are there, the private equity people are there, so that those companies get to scale, not just in UK sense, but in a global sense. So, but we have some great opportunities. I was in New York for a day meeting, the big investors, the Blackstones and some of the banks, and actually the financial services and markets bill that we're putting through has really gone down incredibly well as the markets and those investors seeing the opportunity in UK financial services. So I think a lot of hard work, but there is some upside as well.
Yeah. Well, and very important, particularly at this moment, to ask ourselves the question, what could go right? And there are some, as you say, some all across the UK examples of fantastic businesses doing fantastic stuff, creating fantastic, just not enough of them to lift the spirits of all places. Can I take you back, maybe come back to the immediate and the cost of living challenge and how we rise to that, what sort of measures we should be thinking about to cushion what will be a very considerable blow to a very large number of people. Variety of proposals out. There's a one from Policy Exchange out about now, I think, which I just glanced at.
Just out this morning.
This morning, which I glanced at as I left my desk. So, as if by magic.
As if by magic, I can
Here's
show you
one
a copy.
produced earlier, Blue Peter style. Without giving away the keys to the kingdom on what may or may not be coming, how should we think about the appropriate fiscal response, do you think, Nadhim, to that?
So, obviously, I'll take a closer look at the Policy Exchange proposals, but the headlines that I saw, for me, looked like the right direction of travel, i.e. you target the help. We need to target to those families, those households who literally have no headroom at all. Now, the 37 billion that we are in, midway through delivering, will help. So everyone getting £400 of their energy bills will deal with about 50% of the new energy price cap rise between October and December, but that only delivers between October and December. We need to look at January and then beyond that. Why? Because I think we need to send a very clear message to Mr. Putin that this strategy is not going to work, that we are going to be resilient, we're going to put help in to households and to businesses. So the targeting, I think, is the right approach. And then dealing with the consumption issue, which again, the Policy Exchange proposals deal with, I also think is the right approach. We're working up options for the incoming Prime Minister to be able to hit the ground running, to be able to make some of those decisions. There are no easy options for all the reasons you outlined in your opening remarks about the headwinds that we're facing. But I think the challenge, as I see it, is we need to, whatever we do, has to be operationally deliverable. Now, there are some lessons that we've learnt from the pandemic response. So on SMEs, we've got some levers available to us that have worked incredibly well and were efficient in terms of getting that help in the short term. And then the medium and longer term. So for next winter, for example, I'm already working on these voluntary CFDs, for example, which will help with cushioning some of that shock. And of course, returning to growth is something that we need to focus on. All of that has to mean that we really have to come together and not, if you look at pay settlements, not to chase inflation. I know people, everybody is worried, everyone's concerned. More so if you are, a senior teacher or a senior nurse on £45,000. I spoke about this the other day, where you may not be on benefits on UC, but you still need that help. And so I'm looking at all those options of how we help people weather the storm and send a clear message to Putin that this is not going to work.
Last question from me, because Ruth's standing up as a signal, which you got to the audience. I think that's what that means, Ruth. Which is, you've touched upon it more than once already, Nadhim. But this cost of living crisis is going to hit disproportionately, as you said, sort of some of the poorest people and some of the poorest places in the country. And on this question of place, an issue close to to both of our hearts, actually, as it turns out, the levelling up issue, if you like.
Yep.
What status does that have, do you think, looking ahead?
It can't be more important than it is in the next 24 months and then beyond. Why do I say that? Because if you look at what happened in my part of the world, in the West Midlands, during the pandemic, we took a massive hit, disproportionate hit in the West Midlands. But we've got some good local leadership, so in Andy Street, and you see the recovery and the investment opportunity in the West Midlands. I was out in Qatar for the Platinum Jubilee to sign an MOU on education because they're very interested in us doing teacher training for them. We've got evidence-led teacher training for our own teachers, 500,000 teacher training opportunities. They want to see the same thing. The nugget I brought back from there is they're looking at Birmingham and the West Midlands as their next big investment opportunity. Why? It's a combination of good leadership and infrastructure. There's a Secretary of State. It's 43 minutes between Birmingham and London on HS2. We think we can invest in infrastructure for you in Birmingham and the West Midlands. So really important, and I know it will be important to, in fact, both candidates for the leadership, and whoever's Prime Minister next week will double down and make sure we deliver on levelling up.
That's great to hear. Ruth.
Thank you very much, Andy, and thank you very much, Chancellor. It's really, really good to hear your responses. Thanks for your welcome to the Policy Exchange proposals on energy, which, as you say, try to target support while also maintaining the link to price signals, which we think is very important in the energy debate. I now want to take a few questions from the floor. If you're online and want to raise a virtual hand, please do so. I'll try to take as many as I can, but we have about 15 minutes. Yes, I'll take the lady on the front row.
Hi, it's Ione Wells, BBC. Firstly, thank you. Neither candidate to be the next Prime Minister has put forward a costed plan yet to deal with the rising energy bills that we're going to see this autumn. Just how difficult, in your opinion, will the decisions for them be and the economic trade-offs that they're going to have to make? And secondly, you've just said that targeting is the right approach, but you've also said that households on 45 grand salaries are going to be struggling this winter. How do you target those kinds of people who aren't on welfare when we know that, for example, council tax bans aren't reflective of incomes and modern day house prices?
Yeah, so we've been working out all options for the incoming Prime Minister, including where I think we've got some headroom. So we've got some headroom on the capital side of the balance sheet. I think Liz Truss, who I'm backing, has said she's not going to be able to write a budget during the campaign. I think that's right. It's the responsible thing to do, to wait until the end of the contest to be able to then hit the ground running. My responsibility has been to make sure that all those options are worked up, and how we then operationalise them is also something that I can demonstrate to whoever walks into number 10 on the 5th of September.
But just sort of how difficult do you think those decisions are going to be given the conflicting demands they're facing at the moment?
Well, look, there are no easy options. We have war on our continent. We've just come through a pandemic. But this economy is resilient. I described to you earlier why I think we're resilient in terms of jobs, in terms of course, our housing market, and of course, our banks are well capitalised. But nevertheless, we know that we need to make sure that we deliver for both households and for business because when you're seeing an increase in your energy bill, if you are in hospitality, even some of the medium or large sized businesses, by 3.5, 4 times, and if those businesses are allowed to go under, the longer term scarring effect, I think, is deeply damaging. So we have to make sure that help is in place, but then also reassure the market. So we've got a long-term strategy to wean ourselves off imported hydrocarbons.
And just sorry, on that second question, just very briefly, is there an example of how you could target those kinds of households?
There are a number of ways that we've been able to do it. The Household Support Fund has worked. We've given more money to local government to be able to actually operationalise that. We give, I think, £26 million for the operation of that. There are ways that we're looking to see how we can deliver most efficiently for those households. Of course, the universal credit system has worked really well as well.
Thank you very much for your questions. So I'm trying to get as many people in as possible, so please do keep them brief. Yes, the gentleman in the second row.
Thank you, Nazim. Rajan Semi, Office of Trudy Harrison, Member of Parliament for Copeland. Just yesterday, the Prime Minister disapproved of the short-termism of successive British governments at their failure to do justice to our pioneering nuclear industry. Boris Johnson has been a vital ally of the industry, with his final words just yesterday saying, "Go nuclear, go large, and go with Sizewell C." How confident are you that the next Prime Minister, whoever he or she may be, and the Treasury will support our country's nuclear vision, which will no doubt lead to lower energy bills, greater energy security, and a greener environmental footprint?
Short answer, very confident, and I tell you for why. You heard me in my earlier remarks saying I don't think we can get to net zero by 2050 without serious investment in nuclear. We have some great technology from the UK. We're backing the Rolls-Royce consortium on SMRs. If you look at that team, it is Rolls-Royce with Constellation Energy from the United States of America. And some of the conversations I've been having in Washington was, how can we bring that collaboration much closer on SMRs, on AMRs, to make sure that we can scale at speed, because it's going to be really important that we continue that investment. Large nuclear we're delivering, but we're very serious about making sure that we deliver for SMRs and ultimately for AMRs as well. So in many ways we're very lucky in the UK in that actually in the court of public opinion people absolutely understand that you need nuclear, as well as of course offshore wind, tidal. We've got some fantastic technologies emerging in the UK that we will be backing in our overall strategy. And of course gas, I spoke about gas in my Mansion House speech. Why? Because of course it's a transition commodity, but nevertheless you need to invest in your gas assets to be able to make the transition successfully, because you have to carry people with you. People are feeling hurt because you're not taking them with you and safeguarding them from the shocks of high energy prices. Then you will lose the ability to deliver on net zero by 2050, and we don't want to do that.
Okay, I'm going to take one more from the floor before going online. So the gentleman in the second row, please.
Sam Richards, IPRES Consultancy. So while short-term measures such as providing £400 relief to households may be effective, what sort of long-term measures are in place that can counter the problems we're facing if they are pervasive over the coming years? And in particular, what long-term measures are there available that will be safeguarded from whatever the political climate may be?
Sam, that is exactly what I'm talking about in terms of the long-term energy strategy to wean ourselves off imported hydrocarbons. So investing in our own gas assets, but also making sure that we make the investment in hydrogen, we make the investment in offshore wind, which we are, and in nuclear and other renewables as well. That's how you ultimately deliver, I think, prosperity and the longer term ability to shield yourselves from the unpredictability of geopolitics. I met with the Kristalina Georgieva, the IMF, and the fragmentation that the IMF is seeing in the world, the geopolitics, is deeply worrying. What we need to do is make sure we coordinate. Hence why what we've just done on the G7 on oil price cap is so important, because you build on those successes, and we want to bring other countries into that. So what we've agreed today is to, of course, talk to Turkey and India and South Korea and others. So we build a much wider coalition against tyranny.
Can I now turn online? Emily, I don't know if you're there, Emily Green? Emily, are you on mute? Or have we lost you? Okay, we'll move to the next online person, which is Julia Lobu Said. Are you there, Julia? There are always hiccups with the online streaming. So
good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes. Is that Julia?
It is. Yes. Good afternoon. Thank you. I'm Julia Lobu Said. I represent independent travel agents across the country, and I'd like to just bring it to the coalface if I can. A lot of small businesses, particularly in the travel industry, have had none of that gap between the pandemic and now cost of living crisis. They are facing excessive energy price costs, as we all are, but also very critical for the industry in terms of servicing business with travel requirements, but also employment and local economies. As the Chancellor, are there any thoughts that you can give or reassurances you can give to some of these private small businesses that are critical for our economy and local jobs and communities?
Julia, thank you for your question. Yes, it's actually it's been the theme of today, and it's something I've been talking about for a while, which is to say that we need to make sure we help small businesses, because I think the long-term scarring effect on the economy, if we allow perfectly viable small businesses to go under because of the energy price shock that we are encountering, would be a mistake. And that's why we're preparing options for the incoming Prime Minister to hit the ground running, to make sure we deliver not just for households but for businesses as well.
Okay, thank you. I am going to go to the gentleman on the front row.
Thanks. Thank you very much. I'm sure there's others in the room that would echo this, and party politics aside, there's plenty of us that hope you are still Chancellor this time next week. I think that would be a very good decision for the incoming Prime Minister to take. But my question was about tax-free shopping. We are out of line with other competitor cities, not just London, but other cities around the UK, not least places like Stratford-on-Avon, that we don't offer tax-free shopping for overseas visitors. We ended that a few years ago. That would seem to be quite a quick win and probably cost-neutral in terms of attracting new tourists back into towns and supporting the hospitality industry at a time when as the previous person just said, these small businesses involved in the travel industry are having a tough time of it.
Thank you for the question. I was actually in the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy when that policy was decided upon, and I think some of the modelling from the Treasury at the time, because we were coming out of the EU, meant the Chancellor at the time didn't feel it was the right thing to do. I think it'll be up to the next administration to look at all options of how we can encourage investment in the UK. And I think one of the things, obviously, that Liz has been talking about is obviously reversing the corporation tax increase that was due to come in. We have to look at all these things and make sure that one of the things I'd like to see more of, and my team have been working since I came into the Treasury on the 5th of July, is some dynamic modelling in the Treasury, and not just sort of intermittently, but actually something that we do all the time. But we'll certainly look at any options that would encourage more investment and more visits to trade, especially for constituencies like Stratford-on-Avon.
I'm going to take one final question from the floor. Shall I take my colleague at Policy Exchange on the back row there, Gerard? You had your hand up before.
Thank you, Ruth. Gerard Lyons, Senior Fellow here at Policy Exchange. Thank you, Chancellor, for your reassuring and positive comments about tackling the near-term outlook. Early in the discussion with Andy, institutions came up, but one institution that wasn't mentioned was the Treasury. It's often said that the Treasury is too powerful. In other countries, the powers that the Treasury has here in the UK are often divided between different departments, budgetary and economic. 2 Labour Prime Ministers have thought about changing it, Harold Wilson and Gordon Brown. Do you think it's something that a new Conservative Prime Minister might consider? And do you think it's something that's good for the economy, given best practice in other countries?
Gerard, it's great to see you, and I hope we're getting together soon. But let me take a step back a second. We've got 24 months to deliver. If it is a Liz Truss administration, her 3 key words are delivery, delivery, delivery. And I think my advice would be, let's focus on making sure that every Secretary of State has their clear priorities, clear strategy. When I was in education, Ruth will remember when we had that dinner. Part of the reason I wanted to have that dinner because actually institutional memory is important, and we got everyone from Michael Gove to Ed Bulls and Ken Baker and Ruth and others around the table. We went skills, schools, families, right? And I think what Liz will do will focus each Secretary of State on those delivery priorities, and then we will drive those hard over the next 24 months. My very strong advice, and this is where I think most people who know me well, I don't sort of flannel, I try and give a straight answer, would be not to, at this stage, start tinkering with the machinery of government. We need to align those priorities and then start delivery. I did it on vaccine. I think we can do it pretty much in every department. I don't think anyone comes into work, by the way, in the morning wanting to do a bad job. I think what happens is you come into work and you don't understand what the strategy is from the leadership, and you're slightly, taken aback. You feel a little bit negative, and then that negativity begins to obviously harm the overall delivery. And so I think that clarity of what we need to achieve, what we need to deliver, will mean we will get the best out of the people we've got, whether it's in Treasury or in any other department. I have to add one caveat, which I hope if I am in the Treasury, I will continue to champion and be passionate about. And if I leave the Treasury, I hope my colleagues will continue with that same principle, if I can call it that. When we make a decision at Cabinet, I think the role of the Treasury, the Finance Department, your CFO, should be the enabler, right? Should lean in and drive the policy, right? Once you've made a decision, right? Let's have the discussion, the debate at Cabinet, and make a decision, and then drive it. Far too much of what happens is we make a decision, and then there's a bunch of hurdles put in the way for delivery. I think you're injecting risk when you start doing that in any organisation. It's much better to say, actually, you know what, I don't want to do that, and here's why we're not going to do it. But once we've agreed we're going to do it, lean in and make it happen.
Thank you very much, Chancellor. It's really good to see your business experience, first-hand business experience, come to the forefront there, and very important it is too to have that realism and pragmatism. So thank you very much for spending your time with us today. Thank you, Andy, for such a delightful conversation. If you'll forgive me, I'm going to take the Chancellor straight out because I know that you're in demand elsewhere, and then if you could mingle and follow later, that would be brilliant. Thank you.